Thank Reverend Elizabeth for sharing her pulpit with me today. How many of us have been in and out of despair over these last several months? How many joined one of the May Day events? Great. How many of you have been involved in the various boycotts and other demonstrations that have occurred since inauguration? Wonderful. It is so good to be together when times are tough. Like how the blessing song co-written by Rumi and Laila Ibrahim goes, "It's a blessing you were born, and it matters what you do. What you know about God is a piece of the truth. Let the beauty you love be what you do, and you don't have to do it alone." For the most part, my union activity has been keeping me out of despair over these last few months, but I did find myself falling into it about a month ago. My continued engagement in this union activity, which is one of the most direct forms of democracy, pulled me out. When preparing for this service, I began asking, how has imagination helped other people from succumbing to despair and allowed them to survive and overcome great injustice? Pleasure activist and social justice facilitator Adrienne Marie Brown writes in her book, Pleasure Activism, that she believes that, quote, all organizing is science fiction, that we are shaping the future we long for and have not yet experienced, unquote. Our imaginations drive our organizing work. We organize because we want something different than what exists now. That is how our imaginations come into play. We have to dream about a different reality in order to motivate people to join together and work toward building a brighter future than our present. I know this is true for me. When I was first contacted by a nurse who asked me to work on unionizing our workplace, I imagined that unionizing would be a step toward bringing about better working conditions, which would then lead to us being able to provide better health care to our patients. For example, we envisioned having limits on caseloads so that we would be able to spend enough time with our patients rather than rush. Even though we are still negotiating our first contract, we have seen some of the fruits of unionizing. No longer can our employer make unilateral decisions that affect us, or they risk being charged with an unfair labor practice and facing our collective action. It takes a lot of work and conversations to unionize a workplace. Those of us on the organizing committee imagined together the steps we needed to take to unionize. We imagined the conversations we needed to have with coworkers. We imagined where and when we could have these conversations. We imagined concerns people would have about unionizing. Later, we imagined how we would march on the boss and tell them that we had enough signatures to have a union election. Later, we imagined how the employer would attempt to union bust and how we would respond. We have many stories of people who, through collective action, imagined together and brought about real change in the world. We also have stories of people that were able to survive because their imaginations augmented their hope while they were experiencing despairing times. One of these stories was told by Eli Wiesel in Night, his book about his experience in concentration camps during World War II. After Wiesel and his fellow prisoners were brought to the concentration camp Auschwitz, the Jewish prisoner in charge of the new prisoners gave a brief talk or sermon. In that sermon, he told the new prisoners, quote, "We shall all see the day of liberation. Hell does not last forever. Let there be camaraderie among you. We are all brothers and share the same fate. help each other. That is the only way to survive, unquote. In this speech, the leader takes the new prisoners through 3 important steps. First, he sparks their imagination by saying, "We shall all see the day of liberation." The idea of liberation must have seemed extremely remote for the prisoners at this point in their journey. And the fact that a person who had been in prison longer could speak of liberation as a given must have provided Wiesel and the others with hope. Second, he connects the people to each other and to himself by saying, "Let there be camaraderie among you. We are all brothers and share the same fate." At this point in the journey, the prisoners had seen babies and small children thrown into burning ditches, had been lied to by an inmate who told the new prisoners that all of them would be burned, and they had been beaten by other prisoners. The leader's instruction reminded the new prisoners that they were a community in order to inspire them to avoid infighting. Third, he provides a call of action by instructing the prisoners to help each other. The leader's words and kindness lifted up the new prisoners who were scared and had already witnessed death and experienced cruelty at the hands of fellow prisoners and Nazi guards. The Holocaust happened almost a century ago, and we have much older stories from which to draw wisdom. One of these stories began to be told a few thousand years ago. The origin story for the Jewish people is in the book of Exodus. In this story, all good things that happened to the Hebrews and then Israelites are attributed to the divine, albeit with the help from the advocacy of Moses. God convinces Moses to be the leader of the Hebrews in Egypt. God causes Pharaoh's heart to harden so that he does not allow the Hebrews to leave. God causes the plagues to happen. God causes the waters of the Sea of Reeds to part so that the Israelites can pass safely, then causes the waters to drown Pharaoh's army. God causes quails to arrive to feed the Israelites in the evening, then manna to fall from heaven to feed them in the morning. God gives Moses the 10 Commandments so they can build a community based on right relationship and right action, and on and on. Though the story is attributed to Moses, we know that this book was written at least 800 years after this journey supposedly happened, and possibly that it was written by more than one author at different times. There is no archaeological evidence supporting this story, though we know that plagues occurred in Egypt, and there is a white flaky substance that the Hebrews purportedly ate that some scientists believe to be either lichen or sap or secretion from insects who feed off desert shrubs. For the purpose of this sermon, let's imagine that the Passover story happened and there was a tribe of Hebrews who escaped Egypt and returned to Canaan. What if, as this story got passed down, storytellers attributed the success of the people to their imagination and their willingness to build community around this collective imagination? What if the storytellers used a process theology approach? God and the Hebrews together were responsible for their survival. Perhaps the gift the Hebrews received from the divine was the ability to imagine different possibilities. Freedom and imagination are linked intrinsically. Freedom is often defined as the absence of constraint, where constraint can be by force, necessity, or thought. We can't take actions that we can't imagine. Without imagination, we're not free. Perhaps the Hebrews' first step toward liberation and freedom was that they accessed their imagination in order to work toward a better life. In order to escape their servitude in Egypt, the Hebrews had to first imagine a better life for themselves out of Egypt. Even though they were hard laborers, they had food, shelter, and relative safety. They would need to imagine that not only would they have food and shelter in their new home, They would have livelihoods, and their livelihoods would be easier than what they faced in Egypt. They would be the masters of their fate rather than servants. Because, according to this story, this particular tribe had been in Egypt for approximately 400 years, they had no lived experience as being free people. They would only have the stories passed down through the generations. In listening to these stories, they would need to use their imagination to visualize what had come before servitude and therefore what could come in liberation. Life never happens the way we imagine it. Surviving in the desert was harder than the Hebrews imagined when they first escaped. Resilience requires that we constantly reimagine many possibilities and then work to realize the best ones, even if the best options today are different than the ones we imagined yesterday. In the desert, the Israelites had no crops to harvest or livestock to slaughter. In the Exodus story, after they complained to Moses that they should have stayed in Egypt rather than starve in the desert, Moses consults with God, who assures Moses that God will provide for the community. That evening, a flock of quail arrives, which feeds the community that evening. In the morning, the community finds what they call bread, which is a white, flaky substance that they hadn't seen before. If we remove God from the picture or imagine the divine's intervention differently than providing food where never before there was food, we can imagine that at least one hungry member of the group saw this substance and imagined, what if I can eat this? They then were brave enough to eat it. Others, seeing that the person who ate this substance didn't get sick, then ate it themselves. What is important is that despite their fears about their survival and not knowing when they would reach their new homeland, the Hebrews' imaginations overrode their despair and motivated them to continue going forward to the new land, rather than returning to their known but oppressive past. When they were hungry and weak, it was easy for the Hebrews to imagine themselves starving in the desert and even to consider returning to slavery or servitude. It is a gift to be able to imagine many possibilities, some probable, others remote, and then to inspire each other and together make difficult choices while facing great uncertainty. How can we use this story to help us today? It must have taken strong imaginations to keep up hope while in the desert, not knowing where they were going and not knowing what they would find there. They had to reimagine themselves as people responsible for their own lives, rather than always taking direction from their bosses. They had to learn how to govern themselves now that they were in charge. Thousands of years after this story was told and then written down, it became inspirational to enslaved Africans in this country. Go Down Moses is one of the spirituals that was based on the Exodus story and sung in order to lift the spirits of enslaved Africans. The Exodus story, as it applied to their own liberation, provided enslaved people with hope as they imagined that they too would become liberated someday. Harriet Tubman, who was responsible for rescuing about 70 enslaved people, was called Moses because Tubman was seen as playing the part of a human leader who listened to and inspired others to carry out the will of the divine. Though the vast majority of us in this country are not facing enslavement, it can help to draw inspiration and learn from people who faced much greater obstacles than us. On a smaller scale, the lawsuit filed 2 weeks ago by several cities and counties, unions, and nonprofits against the executive branch's plan for mass layoffs and program closures has led to the most sweeping halt in the plan. It took the imaginations of many people in diverse organizations to work together to combat what all plaintiffs believe to be an unconstitutional use of executive power. Other lawsuits have resulted in similar temporary blocks to the executive branch's plans, but the current block is the most far-reaching stop. These organizations saw each other as siblings, and by working together, they are helping one another. Let's revisit the sermon by the Jewish leader at Auschwitz, and this time, let's slightly modify and reverse the order of his words. Help each other. Let there be a camaraderie among you. We are all siblings and share the same fate. We shall all see the day of liberation.